of the associated comrades, because there is quite a network of them, and my publishers for making this tour possible. I've said it before and I'll say it again because it's good for a joke, but they got me doing 2-3 presentations per day in a different city every day. So I asked them sort of tongue-in-cheek whether they'd ever run a sweatshop, and they got all embarrassed and nervous. And I said, no, it's fine. I really appreciate the interest, the levels of interest out there. So thanks so much to everybody.
Can I just interrupt? Do folks feel Michael needs a microphone? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It's all set up. I just forgot.
Okay. Yeah, it's a lot easier. I mean, I could always use my drill sergeant voice, but yeah. Easier, much easier. Okay. All right, so now we don't have to shout over the grinding machine or whatever it is. Okay. This is kind of not the talk I'm going to give, because this is the talk that I've been giving at various universities as I go along my way. And you know those varsity types, you got to talk slightly differently to them here, Michael. I always joke about that because I'm not an academic. My co-author is, so it's this running joke between the two of us. He's a doctor of sociology at Wits University. I've never been to university. I've never had the opportunity. So yeah, it's just sort of a running joke between the two of us. But yeah, that's just sort of a running joke. That's not quite what I'm going to talk on in a way, but in a way it is. In other words, I'm not going to give the prepared formal presentation that I gave to those guys. What I'm going to do essentially is run through a series of images that I've collected. Some of them are fairly an arbitrary collection of pictures from around the world, and talk a little bit about them in the context of the book. I'll give you a bit of background to the book. The environment in which we operate in South Africa is fairly tough. Some of you might know something about that. Others of you maybe have a very slender idea around how the ANC came to power and about how apartheid was defeated, etc. A lot of the popular tale, the popular narrative that's put about in the West and in the rest of the world is in fact, well, it has a significant element of mythology in it, a self-mythologizing by the African National Congress, which is part of a self-justification of why they are now the ruling class and why they are doing the same things to the working class in South Africa, as in sending in the riot police, sending in the eviction squads, cutting people's water and electricity off, kicking them out of their homes, forcibly removing them from place to place. The exact same things we fought against under apartheid are still occurring under the supposed democratic state. And I think that's a good place to start because of the sort of continuity that is represented by the state. Anarchists are usually represented as being only anti-state, but it's not the only, but it is certainly a key element of the anarchist idea and practice. And perhaps the most obvious thing about the state is not only that it has the guns, but that it is this huge unelected bureaucracy. And this is what a lot of people who perhaps often come from a Marxist tradition kind of are maybe perhaps now starting to grasp, that the state in fact is an entity in its own right, that often has interests that are separate to the government of the day, to the ruling party of the day. And it has its own internal dynamic and its own prerogatives and its own way of defending itself. But of course, it is, even in the most supposedly democratic of countries in the world, it is nevertheless an unelected body of people. But anarchism goes far beyond that. The environment in which I operate is, yeah, as I say, fairly tough. We've, yeah.
Trying to turn the microphone in the direction of the speaker.
Oh, okay. Is that what's causing the feedback? Sorry for that. The end of apartheid was brought about by a confluence of factors. One of them was very obviously, and I think as an anarchist I'd like to think primarily, the insurgency in the townships and in our poor areas. This was a sustained struggle which at times had almost exhausted itself. In other periods, such as 1946 or the mid-1950s, surged to the fore again, was suppressed, beaten back, surged up again, and eventually in the 80s became really a national insurrection. But there were a lot of other factors coming into play at that stage. By the late 80s, the Soviet system was about to enter its terminal phase, and we were heading towards the fall of the Berlin Wall and the unraveling of the Soviet Empire, and all that meant for the liberation movements that had been supported by, I mean, physically, in terms of physically, militarily, ideologically, financially, by that empire, such as the ANC and South African Communist Party. Sorry. One of the other factors was quite clearly that the ruling elite wanted to get out of the bind, wanted to get out of the corner that it had painted itself into. You know, when South Africa had started out, it had been essentially quite a sweet deal for the guys who owned the mines and owned the means of production. You had this massive, impoverished, cheap labor pool that you could draw on at any time. Easily replaceable labor. Some guys get uppity. You just kick them out, send them back to the rural areas. There's thousands of guys where he came from. Initially, the system worked great. But eventually, as they try to modernize the economy, it obviously stops working because they're trying to create a system where they can actually manufacture goods, make more profit by, instead of just pulling steel out the ground, well, let's, I don't know, make toasters out of that steel. I don't know if you get steel toasters. That's probably a bit of an oxymoron. Probably plastic toasters, but anyway. So you want to make toasters out of that steel, but then you need the skilled workers to beneficiate that steel, to turn it into a toaster that you can sell. That is more expensive than the steel that it's made out of. So you need skilled workers, but you also then need a domestic market. And two of the problems created by the colour bar in the South African economy is that black workers are deliberately kept underskilled and poorly paid. That's how the system works. It's great, it's fantastic. It really works brilliantly for the ruling elite, which is predominant